Welcome to the Bored and Nerdy podcast. I am your host, Corey Munoz, and as always, I am here with my brother and co host, Christopher.
Today we'll be discussing the HBO Max series, Raised by Wolves. Just a quick graphic content warning and controversial topics warning. Have an open mind coming into this show, but it's definitely something that you probably don't want to watch with your 8-year-old, for sure.
Going from there, I guess we also need to declare that there will be spoilers. This show is pretty new. It's a 2020 release. I believe it just stopped airing recently, wasn't it? October?
Yeah, it's brand new. Just finished up.
Super spoiler warning then. You've had a month to watch this show's finale, and we're going to talk about everything. We're going to start with episode 1 for you, which is free and available on YouTube. And we'll give you another warning once we pass beyond that free episode. But the whole podcast will be full of spoilers. And if you're interested in watching the whole thing, remember it is an HBO Max series.
The show is actually created by Aaron Guzikowski. The first 2 episodes are directed by Ridley Scott, and Ridley Scott was actually directly involved in the pre-production for this show. And Ridley Scott would do storyboards because that's what he's famous for, is doing storyboards. In the show's aesthetic, you can definitely feel that little bit of Ridley Scott like frosting on the science fiction. It feels like you could grab this show and plop it right into the Alien universe, and it would fit perfectly. They decided to set the show on a planet, Kepler 22b, which is a real planet. It's some 100 light years away from the planet of Earth. They chose a planet super far away from Earth so that they wouldn't have to worry about too much being discovered about the planet. In fact, it's highly likely we'll never discover anything about this planet because it's so far away. But they did want to pick a real place to give it kind of a real feeling.
Which I thought was fascinating. I'm not a giant space nerd like you are, where, I think it's all interesting and I'll look into some things. But when I first watched the show, Kepler 22 is a reference that went right over my head until I went to Google some facts about the show to write down names so that I said it correctly. And then Kepler 22 shows up and it's, telling me that, oh yeah, Kepler 22 is the name of the sun-like star in the system, and Kepler 22b is a planet there which is thought to be ocean-like, a water world, and it starts talking about all these things. And so I had this moment where it was, wow, I wonder what else in this show that they, took from reality and warped. A lot of that can be attributed to Ridley Scott because, as you said, he came in for the first 2 episodes as the director because, he's on record saying it. He wanted to set the tone for the whole show, and he did that very well. And what's interesting about the way that he made his actors behave is the amount of freedom he gave them in doing it, because we had a very unique introduction to our characters, which is really a great segue into the first episode, where it literally begins with what can be described as the birth of 2 adult characters. They start from the beginning with us because they are androids that aren't pre-existing entities in the world, so far as they or the audience are aware that you jump into this fresh world with them and get to experience everything anew.
So, spoiler warning here. Now we're going to get into the first episode. So if you haven't seen the first episode on YouTube, I highly recommend checking it out. It's free. The rest of the show is on HBO Max. But the first episode, I feel, has legs enough to stand on as a piece of entertainment. You want some sci-fi that you can sink your teeth into. There's an hour worth of the show on YouTube. It's definitely, there's enough there that's compelling enough that you'll enjoy the hour. So with that aside, we're going to get into talking about the first episode here. And as Corey just mentioned, it starts out with these two android characters coming online. I just want to right out of the gate say that Father is my favorite character. I absolutely love the character of Father. I rewatched the first episode recently. Right out of the gate, like right off the bat, like they're in like mortal danger, and they're androids, so they're really melodramatic, and they're just kind of robotically and methodically responding to this situation of terror. And he's cracking a joke because it's evidently right off the bat they wanted to open with in his programming. It's in his programming to tell dad jokes. Oh my god, I loved it. Oh, smile on my face every time he tells one of those crappy jokes.
I have to agree. Father is also my favorite, and I'm surprised that I can say that with such confidence because by the end of the first episode, I was convinced that another character, Marcus, was going to be my favorite because he is played by Travis Fimmel, the actor of Ragnar Lothbrok in the Vikings show, which is a show that I really enjoyed. And so as soon as I saw him, I literally shouted out, Ragnar! And I got really excited. But you're exactly right about Father. From the very beginning, for a guy that's supposed to have like zero charisma as, some android, Father crushed it. He stole scenes throughout the whole thing. Um, he was fantastic.
Just talking about the first episode alone, the first episode covers so much ground. And yeah, we're introduced to Marcus like right at the end of the first episode, right?
Correct. I definitely jumped ahead a little bit.
But there's just so much ground that's covered in this first episode that I feel like you could pluck the first episode, tack an hour long bit onto it with like a resolution at the end, and it could be a theatrical movie. Like
Absolutely.
it has the feeling that it would work.
I think that the first episode was season one of this show.
I
If
agree.
you were to spend more time in it, you could have had an entire season just in episode one. So it's like this prologue and pilot episode and first season that has the beginning, middle, and end that is dramatic, that is compelling, that's amazing. And so after the first episode, I was really confused what I was going to be getting from the rest of the show.
I totally agree. I watched it with my wife Kayla, of course, and we had the same feeling after finishing the first episode. It was like, where's it gonna go from here? Like, where could it possibly go? And that's one thing that I really enjoyed about the show. It's really hard to call where things are gonna go, and the first episode really sets that tone up very, very well.
Huge example of that, and I'm saying this because we've already covered our spoiler alert twice now, is in the first episode they kill off over half their cast and over 90+% of potential cast. There's just a huge rollover of people, and it's like, oh, I guess I shouldn't get attached to any one thing. I'll just wait and see what's going on. And I had no idea what this show is about. I never watched any trailers for it, didn't read any press releases. I didn't know that the show existed until you told me, hey, you should watch the sci fi show. I enjoy it. I'd like to talk about it on the podcast. And so I go and I put this show on, and I'm expecting some like Star Trek level thing where it's like, okay, my brother wants me to watch some sci-fi. The last sci-fi thing he got me to watch was, oh, I don't know, was it the Firefly movie Serenity? Probably. I think that's the last one he recommended. So it's going to be some, cute, campy show. And then all of a sudden people are blowing up like blood bags and falling in giant holes in the middle of the earth, and little kids are disappearing, and giant dinosaur-sized snake skeletons. And it's like, okay, Chris's tastes have matured.
And that's definitely Ridley Scott's touch there. And I think that's one thing to me that makes it feel like a real place, like a real planet, is because there is that gritty side to the world, like frontiersman vibe, where it's these two androids and they're just here in this wilderness on this planet, and they have to survive and like provide for this family. And right off the bat, the tone they set with her incubating the babies, looking back, it seems kind of crazy. Like, why did she do it so fast? Like, why were they like, okay, we're here, we're alive, we're functional, doing babies now? It must have been in their programming, because you would think that you'd want to first search for food sources for when the babies are born.
Was division of labor because while she was incubating the babies, father was out building the settlement and looking around starting the crops and all of that.
Okay,
So I
okay.
think it was just division of duties. She was programmed with create the children and care for them. He was programmed with build their homestead and care for the children.
So he must have done some kind of foraging and like gathering, but they didn't really show any of that because it fades away. But they didn't show him like exploring the countryside or anything like that.
Had his little montage.
Yeah, no, I would have liked something like that injected in there. But like I mentioned, so much of the first episode covers so much ground. It it's cram packed as it is, so I get it. The whole having the babies scene was extremely well done. I've rewatched it several times, and I get confused at what point is it physical props and at what point is it computer generated. It's very well done. It's extremely well done.
They definitely used a lot of practical effects, so I'd be curious on that specific scene as well, because seeing father holding these babies in his hand, it just really kind of gives you that oh and at the same
Yeah.
time. How did you and your wife, as parents of three, feel about the show once a bunch of kids started dying? It was natural illnesses. We didn't understand it. One of them disappeared. How did
Yeah.
you guys feel watching that?
To be perfectly honest, I really liked that the first episodes goes through so much, and basically, like you mentioned, all the kids are dead by the end of the first episode. Because at first, when Tally fell down the hole, I was like, well, great, this is going to be a show that they're going to off a kid in every episode for 12 episodes, and because it opens with Campion's line about mother and father tried so hard to take care of us or whatever, and I'm the only one left. And so from the very first sequence of the movie that, okay, the kids are all going to die. I was really glad that they didn't stretch it out for a whole show, because I wasn't about watching a show that's just about kids dying on an alien planet. So with that said, it of course it's horrifying to watch, and I was glad they showed it off or didn't show it on camera. I have to admit that it started to bother me around the last section of the episode, when it was obvious the kids were sick. They were all putting them in blankets, and they were coughing, and they just didn't look well. It was bothering me that the androids didn't have. Why didn't we ever see an autopsy performed on one of the kids that died? You know what I mean? Like, you think that as sophisticated caretaking androids, they would have been more methodical about it, taking one of them away to disassemble this kid and figure out what killed it, because it was obvious they were all suffering from the same thing. What were your thoughts about the way that the episode was just annihilating these children?
I went into this very unaware what was going on, and I had a very biased view of it, trying to think of it from a show that you traditionally recommend. And so I wasn't ready for that. And I'm watching it with my wife and my daughter running around on the ground. She's some 10-month-old kid that just learned to walk. And then here goes Tally walking off towards this giant hole. And I'm like, you're grounded. Come over here. No walking, you know?
I was wondering if Riley would watch any of it with you. That's awesome.
She watched, I would say, half of the show, and so she got to deal with the random. Wait, what happened since the last time I watched? Like, she watched the whole first episode with me, and then I think I watched the next two alone, then we watched some together, and then I watched the ending without her. But she agreed, by the end of it, it was like, wow, that was intense. And what I agree with you, watching the kids, be sick was frustrating because you really wanted there to be some sort of proactive solution happening, and nothing was being done about it. It's like, oh, they're sick. Okay.
Yeah, that seemed strange to me, and it made me wonder if maybe there was a scene that was cut or something, which could be because, like I've mentioned twice already, the episode is cram packed. Like it could be a movie. We're shown that the extra embryos that they packed along in a suitcase, at some point the kids got in there and messed with them because that's what obnoxious kids do. And so that's established pretty firmly that these kids that they got, that's what they got, to maintain their society. And so you really feel for the androids because you want them to succeed. And what's really interesting from a sci-fi uh, point of view on it is this is a very real situation that we're looking at. I mean, of course it's done for entertainment, but it's a very real scenario. It might not be feasible to send people to another planet. Fantastical visual representation of that concept. That's a very well something it could be. What's even more likely is our first journey to another planet will be a robot that goes there to build more robots.
All right. So I guess this is where we give that official warning of we're going to start talking about the rest of the show that is not free on YouTube.
So, serious spoiler warning, we're not going to hold anything back. At this point, I hope that you have watched the whole show because this show really thrives on its mysteries. And to prove that we're going into full spoilers now, one thing I worry about with the show overall as we finish the first season and we're getting into the second season's been greenlit is I hope, fingers crossed, it doesn't suffer from the mystery box itis of the sequel trilogy and of Lost, where because it definitely has that mystery box feel where they like to set up a lot of questions. But I wonder now that the first season has wrapped, what questions we're going to get answers to.
I believe it was Aaron Kuzikowski that said he looks at the show as this haunted house that we get to explore. We've only really been in this one section of it, and we get to see the backyard soon. We get to see this other room. And so I would agree, I am worried about the Lost situation happening. I'm worried about the show getting canceled early because when he pitched the show to HBO, he went in with a 5 to 6 season story arc mapped out. And so we're very much so in the beginning. We're greenlit for season 2. Took him about 2 years to do that. 2 years to do season 1. We're greenlit for season 2. And they're thinking 8 episodes on that one, probably a little bit shorter than this current season. And if they keep that going, you're talking a decade of funding being stable, of interest being stable. And with these mystery shows, that's risky.
Yeah, no, I hate it when a TV show doesn't pay off because the ending gets canceled. Yeah, that's definitely something that I would worry about with this show, just because. And I'm sure we'll get into it as we talk through the show here, but there's some serious threads that are left running after the season wraps.
I would argue that most of those threads came up in the finale.
All right. So, right off the bat, we talked a bit already about mother and father because it is like they were born when the show started. They came online. They had kind of a naivety about them. They were very robotic, and throughout the first episode, throughout the Gen 1 of children, we really see mother and father grow as beings, which makes sense because if you've had a child around, you know that you need to have a certain degree of empathy to even tolerate their bull crap. So it's really interesting to me to watch how those two actors portray these android characters through the show because they do grow and they don't emote the way a human would necessarily emote. What it reminds me a lot of is people who have emotional social emotional disabilities and trying to fake it in situations. Like it reminds me of that in the way that they portray their characters. It was super fascinating.
I enjoyed a Zoom interview with the cast where they were asked what it was like having so many kids on set. And the actor for Father, Abubakar Salim, I probably pronounced that horrible. I apologize. But he was talking about it, and he said that it was wild because you would be trying to get yourself centered on this very deep, profound moment of, okay, how would my character act with this, and what would I take away from it, how would I feel after this. And he's describing how the actor for Campion Winta, how he would just be asking him, silly things like, well, would you rather fight a zombie dragon or a real dragon? Then Abu would be like, I can't think about that right now. I'm trying to do this busy thing. And it's like the kids just change this atmosphere on set completely. And so a lot of the cast was really just enchanted by it because it changed everything for them.
That's really fascinating to hear because one thing after watching the whole show that I didn't think about until I was rewatching the first episode and was talking around the house about it, that all the child actors in this show, which is a good chunk of the cast, they all nail it. I can't think of a single moment through the whole show where one of the kids acting pulled me out of the show. So that's really amazing to hear that they were just regular kids on set because it comes off very professional. However they did it, like you legitimately feel that these kids are terrified.
But the older kids, when you look at Hunter,
Yeah,
you look at him and he's got facial hair and you're thinking, why?
maybe what 17 is probably what he's trying to portray.
Yeah, and the actor is 16. So that was
Okay,
pretty on point. But when I was looking at him in regards to the littlest kids in particular,
yeah,
it was, why was he in the same playroom as them? Like when you see him in episode 1,
right.
he is very clearly bigger than these little children. But then the other characters, Holly, her actor's 20, and Tempest is 30.
Okay. Oh wow.
And that means that the actor for Tempest is older than Father and Sue.
Interesting. Well, they do a good job portraying the characters they're supposed to portray, I suppose.
Right? It was just wild when I finally saw that.
I don't know. Maybe he was there because he was in trouble, like he did something, and they're like, "Well, you're gonna have to supervise the Sunday school now for that bad."
That's probably more in the Mithraic culture, because when you look at how Paul expected his parents to act around him, it didn't really seem like a hands-on parenting community. And so
Definitely,
really
definitely.
wouldn't surprise me if the kids were just shoved in this lump of, you're not an adult yet. They didn't care about the, oh, you're elementary, oh, you're middle, oh, you're high school. They don't care about that. You're a
It
child.
could be.
And so that's kind of how I took it.
Definitely. Yeah. I wonder what her criteria was. Like, you were just in this room, so you win.
Whichever ones walked close enough to her because she was blindfolded.
Right. Yeah, that whole sequence is definitely nuts. Where she goes up onto the Mithraean mothership, and you're like, what is she gonna do? What's going on? And that I think is when, for me anyway, Mother started to migrate into the villain seat. Because after the first episode, I definitely wanted Mother to fail. She came in there and she just like decimated the Mithraean ship. She crashes it on the planet. She hijacks some kids just because she feels like she should have kids. Like at that point, for me, Mother changed into that crazy lady on the news who stole a baby.
See, that happened for me sooner. As soon as she killed Father 20 minutes into episode 1, who was
Okay,
already
yeah,
my favorite character, I was like, I
yeah.
hate that woman.
Man, they killed Father a lot. Like Father died a lot. What did he
Yeah.
die like 2 or 3 times? I think he died 3 times.
He died twice
Oh, it was
and
reprogrammed.
was reprogrammed, and then he tried to die again in the finale.
Yeah, damn. Yeah, no, oh, Father. One thing that I really love about this show is that it's a constant carousel of characters. And it makes me wonder if when we're focused in on a group and we're following a group, if narratively we're seeing a story that's warped to this group's perception, because there's a constant carousel of characters as we go from one group to another. You feel like each character gets to take a turn in the hero seat and in the villain seat. Like now Mother's the villain, and now Marcus is the villain, and Father's even the villain, and Campion's the villain. They all take a turn at being the antagonist, and likewise they all take a turn at being the protagonist. And I think it's really fascinating because as a TV show, it really gives you empathy for all the characters, which is really important when you're wanting to stretch it out for hours.
And it's really important when a huge part of your show's premise is portraying the human condition. People themselves aren't completely good, aren't completely bad. And so you get this more realistic view of everybody when you realize just how deeply flawed these characters are. Even in what is supposed to be an atheist utopia, which was the goal of sending the androids and the embryos to this planet.
Now, I really wonder what happened to the original Campion Sturgis, the creator of the androids. What happened that made him go from being with the Mithraic people to being with the atheist people, and like not only that, but building or rebuilding this weapon of mass destruction, necromancing robot murder machine into a caretaker.
I think the only clue that we really got from him about his origin intentions was when he talked to Mother about the endless cycle of killing each other, where humanity could always be trusted to bring the past violences back again, and how it was always this deconstruct, reconstruct cycle. Or he encountered something as weird as what we encounter on Kepler 22b.
You mentioned earlier that at first you thought Marcus would be your favorite character. The way that Marcus is set up, the whole Mithraic troop has a very like Space Marine vibe to me. It has kind of a Warhammer thread through it to me. And so he comes off as kind of the likable space cowboy of the group of pretty straight laced guys, and you find out later that's because he's impersonating a soldier, and he's really not one of their guys, and so that's why he comes off more likable than them.
Which is just an interesting thing throughout the whole show, where from most of the narrative, the likable characters are set up to be atheists, and the straight laced, hard to get along with are the Mithraic devout. And I agree, they definitely have a very Warhammer esque space crusader piety about them.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating too that Marcus and Sue, they're impersonating Mithraic people, but they're actually atheist soldiers. They're impersonating these people, and they're on a trip to Kepler 22b in some kind of suspended animation. But it's a suspended animation with shared memories, kind of like in Futurama where they go into the internet. It's like that, but they could all get together, and so they're all warned things are going to be a little weird in this simulation, and so they kind of use that as a premise for how Marcus and Sue infiltrate the group and fake Paul out that they're his parents, and like you mentioned, they're a little warmer than these other people would be, and so it seems a little off, but they're like, it must just be the simulation. That whole aspect is really fascinating to me because that's basically that Paul got to spend 10 years as a kid. It was probably a weird, like, time dilated 10 years. Basically, the whole time that the first generation of kids for the androids are dying, Paul, Marcus, and Sue are all living in virtual reality land together.
A huge part in this show's themes is parenting, parenthood, all of that. And very early on, we get a message from Sue that she doesn't feel confident being a mother. And we find out much later that it's because she had a really bad miscarriage. And so she's got this mental block that she just can't see herself as a mother. And being forced into that simulation with Paul for those 10 years, she's able to overcome it. She's able to bond with him. And it's really interesting to think about the time, because when they first met Paul, he said, "Why are you talking to me?" Which told us their parents don't interact with their children in this culture. Okay, we know that. And so this 10 years that they're in simulation land, Marcus and Sue had more opportunities to bond with Paul than his real parents did.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. That whole simulation thing plays a pretty substantial role in the show, which is kind of surprising to me. You wouldn't have figured that when they first introduced it as a concept.
They wanted their own Star Trek holodeck.
Right, yeah, or yeah, for sure. It's the internet. It's the holodeck. Right off the bat, they set up Marcus as this likable character. They want you to like him, and I can't remember the guy's name, but there's some kind of uh, elderly Mithraic leader,
Eminence Ambrose.
Ambrose. Basically, there's this argument about, do we go save the kids that the androids abducted or what? And that's a substantial chunk of the story of the first season. Actually, it's probably about half of the first season.
The guy that straight up made people carry him on a palanquin across a desert. Like,
Right.
talk about pompous.
Oh, it gave me serious Space Marine vibes, dude. Like this whole that whole thing. Like that's so something that you would see in a Warhammer artwork or something. So they establish pretty early on that you want to side with Marcus and that you don't like this guy, and so then there's the big like switcheroo where Marcus manages to demonstrate to everybody that he's unworthy by basically burning him alive with this dodecahedron fire butthole in the middle of the desert. Like what? Like is that ever going to get explained?
Which was improv skills. Marcus didn't know that it was going to do that. It happened and he jumped on an opportunity.
But actually, just the character of Marcus in general, he's good at that, jumping on opportunities. That's his whole shtick.
And I feel like we've gone long enough in this that we need to mention, for those of you that are confused that have watched it, Marcus is Caleb. Caleb is Marcus. Caleb being his atheist name,
And what's
Marcus
Sue's other
being
name?
Mary.
Okay, Mary and Sue. Oh God.
Yeah, she's Mary Sue.
Did they do that on purpose? They had to have done that on purpose. Like that's an inside joke. Caleb is Marcus, but I call him Marcus because that's what they call him more in the show.
Mary's really the only one that ever calls him Caleb, other than when Mother calls them out on their transformation.
Yeah, and they had like some kind of reconstructive surgery to make them look like these people they're impersonating, and it's pretty in depth, really. Yeah, he overthrows the leader guy, and he's like, "I'm the new leader now," and this guy Lucius, who's actually a really cool guard character. Again, serious like Imperial Guard, like Space Marine vibes. He backs up Marcus and is basically like, "Yeah, this guy's it. He's the chosen one. Like we got to do what he says." But I think it's right around the same time, like in that same sequence where Marcus becomes the leader, that he starts hearing this weird voice that's basically telling him what to do. You know, like burn things or don't burn things.
It was exactly that scene, yep. And that's why people jump to it, because they were convinced that Sol, the god, was talking to Marcus and had abandoned Ambrose. And so that's why Justina, the other high ranking cleric, was passed over. She even brought it up. The order of succession in the hierarchy should have gone to her.
And that's what I really love about this show, because at this point you've learned that Marcus is impersonating somebody, and that he's not really one of them, and he's one of the atheists, and so then he becomes the leader of the Mithraic group, and and you're just like, you're rooting for him at this point. Yeah, Marcus rules. You're gonna do this, guy. So it's just really interesting to me in the whole show. Like, I love how every character really gets to take a turn in the protagonist's seat.
I enjoy a lot of the really subtle scenes throughout where you can see Marcus and Mary kind of trying to figure out what's really going on and how to behave as a Mithraic person. And characters like Lucius help us there, where he's asking questions about, like, so you killed my father. How do you feel about killing my dad? And Marcus just kind of plays the dumb card of, oh, yep, 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 that's exactly how I felt about everything. And oh, nope, nothing else to this story. Yep, you're right. And the weird part about that whole origin story for Lucius is he's bonding with the guy that killed his dad on a level of he replaces his father with Marcus. He really latches on hard until the very end when he turns on him because Soul turned on Marcus. And so you have this just really strange family loyalty in the Mithraic people. And Ambrose, when he quotes the Mithraic lullaby to her, and she calls it scripture, and then Lucius steps in to say, hey, yeah, every kid knows that lullaby. And so that really just makes me wonder, did Marcus and Sue, our Caleb and Mary characters, actually spend their time wisely in this 10-year simulation? I think they just played with Paul the whole time and had their happily ever after because they didn't even know, like, basic things about their person. They didn't even know basic things about the faith, this lullaby.
Yeah, like, did they do all their research completely? Like, you guys didn't read the material. Am I the only one who read the material?
That's what the dossier is for.
No, that's a fair point for sure, because their disguise is very thinly hidden, and that's why I really expected them to branch off from the rest of the character groups and go off and do their own thing, because they established really early on in that their disguise is very thin. They're not very good at
Which
making.
is weird that they had perfect physical disguises and 10 years to practice before they'd
Right.
have to encounter anybody. You'd think those would be really good disguises, but as soon as they get out of this hibernation, they are still paranoid that they're going to get caught.
One thing that's really interesting is that they chose to make this about the cult of Mithras. They decided to make that like one of the dominant factions in this show. Mithraians in real life, in real history, could be thought of kind of like how the Freemasons have this reputation as being this cult or this elite group of people with inner workings and dealings in the behind the scenes of the day to day. It was a very similar thing, except for set it in like ancient Rome instead. The the Mithraic cult was a thing. It was something that soldiers would join. It was like a brotherhood. It was like a club. They did worship the sun god, or which a lot of other religions did back then. So it was a pretty common thing. There's not a lot of evidence left over from them. There's not a lot that we know about their customs. That's why they're such a perfect group to use to write this extravagant sci-fi future for. There's not a lot of scriptures or whatever, so that's why it's interesting in the show that they're always talking about that the Mithraians get their technology like the necromancer from finding hidden messages in the scriptures from Mithras. I thought it was a very fascinating way to take something in real life, adjust it appropriately for your show, and you can tell they definitely took some inspiration from like the Crusades and Christianity.
I would say Crusades is a really solid way to look at it because the Mithraic cult was stamped out by Christianity. When Christianity came around, things like Mithraism fairly well disappeared. And even before Christianity, a lot of that cult took place in caves. This show caves with theological paintings and interpretive things that are connected to soul, like the giant burning dice in the middle of the desert and little prison cubes And so when you look at all these things going on with the idea of crusades, it's almost like the Mithraics of the past also participated in the crusades of real history, and instead of Christianity being a powerful force there, the Mithraic ones won, and so they got to take all that crusader energy and keep it throughout history. It is interesting how they've incorporated so much real Mithraism into it. You know, you've got the Helodromus, which is a real rank that is mentioned in the show. It's the rank of Otho, the rapist priest guy. And you've got things like Romulus's tooth that Holly finds in the ship, and she talks about the she-wolf, which is an actual Roman myth about the founding of Rome. And you just have all of this real history along with the very real Kepler 22b. And it's just fascinating how much of the show is grounded in the real world.
So they get the second batch of kids, right? And she gets the second batch of kids from the spaceship, and they start getting sick too. They very well establish that the lander has a superior analyzation computer. And so they feed it the food that they've been giving the kids, and it says, hey, the pits of these are radioactive. So basically, being around these, the food they've been eating, being around the pits is what's been killing all these kids. And so they're like, oh, crap, now we can't eat this food. And then they need to start exploring around, and that's when they start finding the weird, skulky alien creatures that they can kill and eat the meat off them, and they taste like pork. I guess my problem with this is at this point they've been on the planet for over 12 years, right? And I get that you're raising like a huge group of kids. Like, that's ridiculous to start with that many kids. Any parent could tell you that even if you're an android and you don't need to rest and sleep, like, you should maybe have started with a half batch and then do another half batch later.
Technically, they did.
Oh, okay, maybe that was their plan. Okay, no, fair enough, fair enough. But anyway, my problem is that you have all these kids, and why wouldn't you at some point dedicate one of the parental figures for exploring? Or maybe when the kids get old enough, like, hey, you two, you're 12 now, you're gonna group up, or you're 10 now, you're gonna group up, and you're gonna just explore south, find more food, like find more food sources and bring it back to camp. I just think that the idea that they'd been eating space potatoes their whole lives and hadn't adventured around to find other stuff is a little hard for me to suspend my disbelief for. Because when you're out there in the wilderness, like, that's your thing. Your thing is to find sustenance. And obviously there's some kind of ecosystem because there's plants everywhere, and there's those creatures that appear that skulk around. But think back through the show. You never once see any insects. There's no bugs in the show at all. Like, I can't think of a single scene where there's a fly or a mosquito, and it's got to be intentional because everything in the show seems so intentional. But it makes me wonder how this alien ecosystem works. And I mean, you would think that they would have established that, like, oh, hey, there's space pill bugs on Kepler 22b, so the kids have been, mashing them into pill bug paste for their space potatoes. Or, I mean, you think that there'd be multiple nutrient sources, and that would be a very high priority for the android parents, is to find multiple nutrient sources for the children.
Perhaps that comes down to a flaw in their programming where the only thing that they are instructed to do is to keep the caloric intake accurate. And so they provide the carbos and the kids eat it and they call it good. And they'd had a very set decision of, we will only move towards the tropical zone as soon as the kids are grown. And so it was probably just a delay where time doesn't matter to them on the same level. I agree that the kids should have gone out when they were 10 because Pokemon proved to us that 10-year-olds are supposed to travel the world. But mother and father were actually super paranoid about letting the kids do anything because Tally went and fell down a hole. And so their overprotective, gotta protect the children mode kicked in. And once the Ark showed up and mother went crazy necromancer, father spent most of the show with an identity crisis, not knowing his role. Am I a protector? Am I a provider? Am I anything? And so his position is flawed. He can't do anything now without mother correcting him or getting upset with him for his actions. And mother won't go anywhere, especially after the Ark, because she now has Tempest and her baby to take care of. And so you've got this weird isolated prison where they keep coming up with reasons not to go anywhere. And the main motivator for going anywhere other than food would have been threats. And that would be the skulky creatures that try and attack them, which we don't encounter, by my memory, until after the Ark explodes.
Yeah,
And
no, it's
so
after the second batch of kids comes.
that means that, those 10, 12 years that the androids are alone with batch one, they never had that threat. And that's weird in itself until you think about, planetary cataclysmic events like a giant spaceship exploding.
So you think it was the Ark crashing that stirred those creatures?
I do.
Okay, interesting. See, when Kayla and I were watching the show, our first theory was that they came from the Ark, like they were actually on board the Ark. But then it seemed less likely as the show went to establish that no, they're critters that live on the planet.
My money's on Ark explosion.
Campion is interesting because he's the only kid of Gen 1 that survives. So he's the only like pure atheist robot grown child around and kicking, which that alone might say something about that whole concept. But as a character, he's basically nothing special, I'm sorry to say. Definitely has only child syndrome. I thought it was interesting that he experimented with faith after his siblings were all dead. That seemed to go away as soon as the Mithraic people showed up. Like then he seemed to go more hardcore atheist at that point. I did not like Campion's rivalry with Paul. I know they were setting it up because they're little boys and it makes sense. But it was just kind of like, come on, guys, you're so the same person. Just get over it, and you'll do great things together. But I feel like they're setting up a Campion Paul rivalry for seasons down the road when one of them is going to be ruler of the atheists and the other is going to be ruler of the Mithraic, and we'll have some Kingdom Thrones on Kepler 22b.
Which was inevitable as soon as the prophecy was discussed in episode 1, where it was about the orphaned boy, and so Campion becomes suspected as being this prophet, and that's why the Mithraics want to take him, and then Paul ends up being some brilliant Mithraic architect. And so the faithful even doubt the translation of the scripture that, oh, maybe orphan was wrong. Maybe Paul's just that prophet. Maybe it doesn't need to be an orphan, not knowing that Paul is an orphan because his parents were murdered. And so you have them both built up as this prophet character. And so, of course, there has to be some headbutting in there. And the jealousy was weird. And I think that only child syndrome's a good way to put it, because Campion got straight up jealous when Paul was smarter than him with the puzzle, accused him of cheating, tried to beat him up. And that's right after they had their little buddy adventure of discovering the fungus in the pits, which led to, I think, the most annoying part of Campion, that he is a very self-righteous person. He goes through the meme version of vegans. He literally has the cocky, Paul and I aren't eating the beast's meat. We're eating fungus, and the rest of you can eat fungus with us if you want to.
Right.
And so they made him into a meme right there. And from, I think, then on, I really struggled with Campion because he didn't become the prophet. He didn't become the chosen one immediately, and he just kind of existed as this. What about Campion for Mother? And then when all the other kids try to escape, Campion shows up magically in the right direction that they were headed with his sling ready to defend them. Come with me if you want to live. Like he's just this convenient plot character at that point.
Tempest has a pretty substantial story where she bonds with the android mother. She is pregnant and she was raped while she was in suspended animation, and so she doesn't want to have this baby. And mother, the android mother, is basically like programmed to, no, we need to preserve all life because we need to have all hands on deck. Basically, the characters, they really grow to like each other through their combined coldness, I suppose. Tempest really seems to resonate with Mother because she's very methodical and not touchy feely.
Tempest was very quick to become blasphemous compared to the other kids. As soon as Mother said, you're atheists now, take off your pendants, give up
Hmm.
on it, Tempest jumped. And I think that it was Otho's fault. He raped her and she's pregnant and
Hmm.
she had this complete loss of faith. And Mother became this safety. She became this destination protector that valued her still, something that Tempest wasn't feeling. She didn't value herself.
Right. It gave her something other than her faith to focus on.
She struggled. I mean, she tried to commit suicide to get rid of the baby. Mother and her bonded over why suicide's bad. And you even have a very fascinating comparison once Mother becomes pregnant and doesn't want her baby because it's not something that she'd anticipated ever being able to do, where her and Tempest are now kind of in that same
Yeah.
ground. And it's weird that in the last half of the show we really don't hear about Tempest baby anymore, because Mother's baby takes priority
Uh,
100%.
well, it
uh,
develops much faster. I mean, when you're feeding it the blood of everything that you can find, and the blood of every android in the wrecked ship, and the blood of the creepy rapist helmet guy, I mean, you're this is how you get a flying snake baby.
yeah, I'm curious if her baby would have ever actually died or if it would have just grown slower if she wouldn't have given into that gluttonous devour everything
Yeah.
cannibalistic vampire mode.
Yeah, it was weird. She had like an episode or two where she was a vampire.
So our other older kid in the group is Hunter. And Hunter is the son of a senior cleric, and he talks about that a lot. He is very entitled. He likes to say, hey, I can't kill that creature for food. It'll make me impure. He's the one that keeps making everybody do prayer circle before dinner. He's the one that tries to convert Campion.
Well, and he's also the older child, so it's more ingrained in his ways. Like he's definitely a product of his environment, and he's like, no, this is the functional way that we need to do this. Where one of the girls, Holly, is very much that way, and Tempest is really Hunter's opposite.
Which would have been interesting to even have a flashback for her to see what she was like before the rape. I'm curious if she was always kind of a rebellious kid or if she used to be super devout. I hope that in the future we get a flashback for her. But with Hunter, I don't feel like you need any flashbacks because all he is that kind of aristocratic, high-born, I'm senior cleric, I'm oldest, you'll listen to me. It's in the scriptures. And he's a very predictable character up until he reprograms Father. I thought that came out of nowhere. He's the one that got Father shot, and all of a sudden he's standing around going, "Are you still in there, Pops?" And he's trying to fix him, and he's excited that Father's back.
Yeah. I really liked that dynamic a lot because, like I said, Hunter comes in and he's the older kid. He's the yeah, like you said, he's the kid with the authoritative family. Like he's the distinguished one, and Tempest is the fallen one, and the show just does such a great job of like rotating the characters through the hero and the villain seat, because from Hunter's point of view, father and mother are these evil people who they arguably are, who killed all their people and crashed their ship, and so he's trying to play the long game, and so father is his enemy. But it's after Marcus's led Mithraians come and liberate the children that Hunter starts to go, gosh, maybe mother and father had something there. There was a warmth about that culture that doesn't exist in my culture. And so that's when I think he starts thinking like, yeah, are you still in there, pops? Like he starts having regrets about it, because he realizes the humanity in the android. I loved how they spread out the revelation of what father was Morse coding with his finger. I love how they spread out the revelation of what it translated to and what it was for over a couple episodes. I thought it made it feel more organic. Asterix, I thought it was weird that they're still using Morse code like in the perceivably distant future. Yeah, I really like that whole sequence, but it might just be because I really liked the character of Father so much that it's like, yeah, anything, like just write him back in. I don't care. He gets reconstituted
I was devastated when they killed Father again.
every
And
time,
so
every time.
I was very happy that he came back. And I thought that the Morse code twitch was his trigger finger, that he was still trying to kill all the Mithraic soldiers. He was walking
Totally.
around pouring their cup like click, 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 shooting them. And then it ended up being Morse code. And it's like, okay, I get it. And then when it was some pious message about Saul, it was like, oh, that's a little weird. And then Hunter cracking the code, that was cool. I liked that. And I can totally see where you're coming from on realizing that mother and father were warmer. And we do have an interesting fall for Hunter. They find out that mother's pregnant. Him and Holly get really excited about writing in the scriptures about the baby and how they think it's from Saul. Saul meant for them to write this. And when they're flying to the hole that mother for some reason thinks is the safest place to have the baby, even though it's crawling with critters, and even Paul, the most recent voice hearing prophet, says they can't hurt us, it's Soul's baby, nothing can hurt us. Hunter, the previously most devout of all the kids, goes, yeah, he's right, but let's land somewhere else. Like, so we actually see Hunter doubting Soul for the first time, which was interesting.
No, the characters all go through very interesting arcs like that. Well, you can take any character and go with where their faith starts and where their faith ends. Every character has a faith arc. You take Marcus, and he's a great one to go with because he starts out the atheist character we all know. He starts hearing voices. He becomes their leader. He really falls deep into it for some reason. Maybe it's the voices corrupting him. Maybe he just really longed for that kind of belonging and that kind of authority. I'm not really sure, but he becomes super devout by the end of it. He's the most Mithraic of the Mithraic. Uh, where you take Mother, and she starts out very similar arc to him, where she's a calculating computer who's on a mission, and she's going to achieve her mission, and through the deaths of her children and through the failure of her mission and the stretches she has to make in her journey, she really comes to have faith in her creator, that her creator sent her on a mission for a reason, and that she has to do right by her creator and her creator's mission. And it's very fascinating to me. Father even drops a line, "Mother, you sound like a believer," and I loved that line so much. Every character in this show has a faith arc. Hunter and Tempest and that second batch of kids, they are going from having their faith in their culture and in Saul to having faith in the family unit instead, like having faith like in tribalism.
And then a play on words here, we're talking faith. We also get faithful in regards to relationships, where you have Marcus who gets upset when he thinks that Sue is no longer faithful to Soul and locks her in a silo. He's upset that his wife would turn her back on God, even though they originally, neither of them were God people. And so the warped belief of faithfulness there, and we get faithfulness as an issue between mother and father when mother decides to go and become a 3D printer for her creator, communing in a virtual space moment. And so father becomes literally jealous that his android mother counterpart, not wife, was unfaithful to him, that she had relations with their creator on the level of father went and stormed off and contemplated divorce. He was trying to figure out how to coexist with mother, even though she made him so angry. And he comes up with, oh, I'm just going to delete my memories so that I can continue being useful to the children. But then he gets really happy when he can, commit suicide with her to kill the baby of the guy that she cheated with, because, that's just how all good parenting works.
I thought it was very interesting that father even had feelings of jealousy as far as mother goes. Basically perturbed that it wasn't his snake baby too. So, but yeah, he goes through this like, gosh, how am I even useful? What's my function in the family unit? And through all this stuff that you'd expect through a regular relationship. But it's just very interesting because it's implied that that's not really part of their programming. It's just how he feels that it should be. Definitely interesting throughout the show to watch the androids become more human.
Which has to be some form of exposure to humans and a not completely robotic programming. And so I wonder how much of it comes from the fact that the androids are literally powered by things like a human heart.
Yeah, and the show does a great job of exploring like where's the line on creation and invention? Where's the line on living and artificial? The show does a great job of tiptoeing those lines and just prodding those questions. In the finale, there's this reveal that they've been being watched the whole time by this blue alien guy. They'd set him up earlier in the show where we'd seen his hideout and we'd seen him flee and like leap up a wall or something, and you kind of forget about him because they never mention him again. But they give this reveal that he's been watching them the whole time, and he seems to be somewhat involved with like the cave paintings that show up, as well as these weird like metal plates that have some kind of data in them that are computerized, or they seem to be. But all
Which are
these other
connected to tarot cards.
right, but all of his everything else we see is very non-tech, so that confuses me a bit. But for some reason, after they kill him, he's got a Neanderthal skull in his bag, right? And firstly, that seems like a very strange thing to be packing around. But father takes a chunk off it and gives it a nibble and says that the isotopes in it match Kepler 22b. So what they seem to be insinuating is that Neanderthals existed as a species on Kepler 22b and on Earth at the same time.
There's room to doubt if those were even the same bandaged people, because when you watch this one that they killed hobble around, the dexterity's not there from the one that
Okay, yeah.
ninja bounced out of the skull. So I wonder how many of those people there actually are. And you have the whole
Mhm.
conversation of de-evolved, where you had humans that became Neanderthals that became the creatures on the planet, which means that the kids have been eating humans, de-evolved
Right, yeah,
humans.
or they've been eating a human relative or human ancestor. I don't know. They did because they definitely used the word de-evolve. It's definitely what she said in the show. I take issue with that, and I mean it's sci-fi, and I'm sure they'll have some sci-fi way to explain it. But that's not how evolution works. Evolution doesn't Super Mario Brothers you back to a different relative. That's not how we weren't once Neanderthals. We've always been modern humans. It's just at some point uh, uh, we split off from that group. There was a baby at one point that wasn't Neanderthal, that was modern human. Uh, the species have related species, but they continue to branch forward, I guess, is my issue with it. So you could go Neanderthals were here at the same time, and this creature that's here is a common ancestor descendant that was a humanoid ancestor that was in the genus Homo, and has evolved over time into those creepy crawly critters that appear randomly partway through the first season. That is their food source, and from the minute they said that those creatures tasted like pork, I had a pretty good feeling that it was going to be some kind of human thing. I thought that it was going to be the children that had died, and they like came back as those things somehow or something. That's what I thought it was going to build to, but it didn't. Ridley Scott's thing is ancient astronaut theory, the thought that life on Earth came here because of ancient astronauts. So it makes a lot of sense that he'd be going that way with things. I take issue with the de-evolution angle unless they're going to explain their sci-fi, because that's not how natural selection works.
Then where does this de-evolution come in? Is it actually that this specific planet was bad, or what? And that's why I said earlier in it that really the finale gave us more questions than it gave us answers, because they threw that at us in what, the last 20 minutes?
Yeah. And gosh, you haven't even talked about the flying snake baby yet.
Oh, the flying snake baby made a lot more sense than that.
I disagree.
Oh, no. The flying snake baby makes perfect sense when you look at it from when you look at it from a creative standpoint. So we're led to believe that the snake baby came from internet sex.
Right. Yeah, with the Futurama internet link up machine, which plays a way more vital role in the show than you would ever figure. And
I,
yeah, she has that interaction with her creator where they're definitely screwing, and then it's like they definitely establish that the android woman becomes pregnant because of that virtual reality sexual encounter. They definitely concretely establish that. My question is that they also firmly establish that she is made from Mithraean technology that the Mithraians don't fully understand, and they also firmly establish that it was the plan of the Mithraians to corner her by manipulating the programming of that pod into a loop so that she would be vulnerable and they could attack her, right? So is the snake baby the result of programming that was already there with her? Is it from programming that was already within the pod from the scriptures? Or is it programming that the Mithraean hacker who is trying to trap her in there programmed? Like, where does the snake baby come from? Which one of those things?
there's actually another option.
Yeah, what's that?
We have a sequence where someone approaches the pod and accesses it that is an unknown user, and
Oh, we
we see
do.
one of the bandaged people kind of skulking up to her. So did one of the natives of this planet, one of the indigenous people that's somehow
Hmm.
connected to Neanderthal skulls,
Somehow.
able to put a snake baby inside her? And there's actually justification for this, and I don't think it's a
There's a
tempest
soundbite for you.
and I don't think that it's a tempest rape scene. I think that if you follow that thread, it's got to be something cultish, because one of Mother's recurring visions is the robed people around the prison D20 that has the helm that's spitting out the milk that is very much so android blood. And when Mother finds the helmet, there is an android head inside of it. It's the exact same mesh patterns as her chest when Campion was modifying her instructions. And so that means that these robed people on Kepler 22b had an android that was spitting out blood the same way Mother did, and this mask has a big old hole big enough for a snake thingy to come out of it. So that means that the cult on this planet
Interesting.
grows these snake things. So are they deities to these people? Or does the snake thing control everybody's minds because, it's some super powered alien
Yeah.
space lizard
Uh-huh.
and it's able to make them make it? And are the Mithraic scriptures coming from Kepler 22b to Earth, and that's what they're translating, and that's how they created the Necromancer, because the one in the cube
Mhm.
on Kepler was actually a Necromancer as well, and so they had to send the instructions to another civilization to create another one, to send it back to them to create a new god.
That could be. Maybe that's what it is. I'd forgotten that a local had effed with the pod. Originally, I had thought that was Tally, who was skulking around, but later it's established that it's possibly that blue guy. We'll be very curious to see how that plays out. I definitely was expecting some kind of horrible monster baby just because it's a Ridley Scott project. I was hoping it would just be a regular baby with superpowers, but no.
Well, it is a regular baby with superpowers. It's a regular snake baby that's half android, and it gained the necromancer ability of flight. That's one thing that they're on record confirming, was that it gained its ability to fly from Mother.
Right. Yeah. And then there's that whole sequence where she's gonna kill it and she's just drop in the hole. Like, father has died so many times and he just promised that boy that he wasn't gonna leave him again. And he's like, okay, mother, hey, you're gonna kill yourself? Let me come too. I'll help. And then they fly their pod down in the hole. That whole sequence was pretty cool, but why did they both have to go down there? I thought it was wild that they revealed that the holes go all the way down to the core of the planet, to the molten core of the planet, which makes sense why they would feel heat coming off of those holes and everything. I thought it was crazy that what seems to have happened is mother, father, and the snake baby flew through the planet's core and came out the other side, all Gungan style. They like crashed over there. So now they're on the other side of the planet. And I would guess that their story in season 2 will be about finding each other and avoiding the snake baby, perhaps.
Looked like they crashed fairly close to each other, so I'm sure that their story will be together in the tropical zone and everybody else's story will be on the other side. And so I am looking forward to learning more about that tropical zone and why that electromagnetic field prevented the ark from landing over there.
Yeah, my theory is that there's an advanced civilization living there already.
Going through the core, one of my thoughts was, okay, here they go. They're going down. Why'd they have to go together? Okay, father justified it. He said, you're too weak to pilot the ship. I need to do it for you. And mother's concerned that she can't just throw it or jump in herself, because if she lets go, the thing can fly and it can get back out onto the side and eat Campion. So it's like, okay, I get why she needs to steal their only ship. And I get why father's going to be the martyr and throw himself down. But they're going down this hole, and father and her have this cute bonding, we're dying together moment. And then they shut down, and then they come to again, and the ship's fine. And so I was really bothered. It's like, okay, so why did they shut down? This ship has to be good enough to go through like atmospheres, which means it needs to have some kind of heat resistance. And father bounced back really quick. So that just means that this android has a bad heat sink.
Oh, that could be. Right. Or maybe they were just trying to spare themselves the pain. I don't know. Yeah, that whole sequence was very bizarre. The whole ending actually was pretty bizarre. Like, it felt like they didn't give themselves proper time for the finale, and then they just started opening questions. Sue's been shot. Little boy, little Paul's hearing voices. Paul's the new Marcus. Marcus is eating eyes. Marcus is tripping out on android eyes.
What was the point of the eye, Lucius? It didn't kill him.
Yeah, what was the point of the eye, Lucius? Were you hoping he'd choke on it? Like, he'll choke.
It'll melt his throat.
All I can figure is that it was a symbolic gesture from Lucius to feed him the necromancer eyes, and all I can figure is that it's a setup so that he can poop it out later and she can get it back.
Oh, see, I was picturing it being the other way, that Marcus was going to gain some kind of necromancer power,
Oh, okay.
eat it and become more powerful. So, Chris, what's something that you really liked about the show? We're talking a specific moment or a scene. What stuck with you?
The snake baby. It was my absolute favorite part. No, I'm kidding. No. Father rules. Father was the greatest thing about the show. Sorry if I stole that from you, because I think we're both on the same page there. But every scene, even when Father was taking his turn in the villain chair, every time Father's on screen, I'm having a good time. He's great. How about you? What was something that you liked from the show? One of your big takeaways?
I really liked Marcus's descent into madness. We
Totally.
had a literal Shadow Link fight scene where he fought himself with perfect choreography,
Yeah, and he
mirrored
and
moves and
he
everything.
won also, or lost. I mean,
Exactly. It was Shadow Link. And then after he gets back to base and sleeps, he wakes up and carves his face off in his dream in the
oh,
most
that was so effed up.
uncomfortable. Oh, that was uncomfortable. I have a really strong stomach. Most things don't phase me, but I got to admit, watching that, my wife sitting next to me, both of us just kind of had that cringe of, oh, this is going on a while. And so I think that as far as acting and directing goes, that has to be up there in one of the greatest portrayals of plummeting into madness of all time.
No, I definitely bought the madness, and yeah, that particular scene where he's carving off his fake face. We like to eat dinner when we watch this show after we put the kids to bed. So I get my nice dinner all served up, and we're sitting there in front of the TV and get the show rolling, and then he starts carving off his face, and we both just like set our dishes back on the coffee table. We're like, well, I'll need a minute.
A more lighthearted, happy thing that I really liked was one line from Paul towards the end when he puts Mouse down on the ground and he says, "Stretch your legs, do some pooping."
Yeah.
Opposite direction. Let's talk negative. What did you not like?
Let's see here. I didn't like the snake baby. I knew it was going to be some weird alien thing because it's a Ridley Scott movie or a Ridley Scott involved creative process thing. I knew it was going to be something horrible, but I didn't like the snake baby. Uh, Mother, I had issues with the character of Mother. Every character does take a turn being the villain. I just find Mother to be dangerous. She's probably the most dangerous character in the show, and so I think it's just because she's dangerous. I don't really care for her character. The big low point for me in the show is just I would have appreciated more details on the hunter gathering. I mean, I understand that that would probably be boring, but that was one of the things I latched onto from the first episode is the whole like frontiersman angle. So hell, I would have even enjoyed it if they had maybe a bit where they teach the kids to read and write because we didn't see that at all either. Maybe they don't read and write. But I would have loved to see a bit where maybe Father and Campion and another kid who's alive are doing some Lewis and Clarking around the area. You know, maybe they've built a raft and they're exploring the river and they're taking uh, flower and plant samples and writing down stuff about them. Like I would have loved a sequence in that or a sequence like that. And with how this show does have some slower, arguably filler episodes in like the beginning of the last third of it, maybe the end of the second bit of it. There's plenty of room in the show for some boring exploring frontiersman crap, and I think it would have knocked the realism up a notch from a show that, for its premise, already comes with quite a bit of realism. How about you, Corey? What's something that you didn't like about the first season?
How often they killed Father?
Leave father alone. We like father.
I'm holding a grudge on that one. Like my dislike is that simple.
just killing father. And they toyed with our hearts. They did it like so many times.
And that's the part that got to me. Like killing a guy once, that's dramatic, that's effective, but at some point you just got to leave the poor guy alone.
The first time they killed father, when mother killed father, we finished the episode and I told Kayla, I was like, I don't know if I want to watch it anymore. I don't know if I care about it if father's not in it.
And that was 20 minutes into episode 1.
Totally. It's like, oh, father's not going to be in it. I don't know. So I was so glad when they brought him back. It's like, yes, the search for Spock.
On that same interview that I talked about earlier, they made fun of how often father died, and they even asked that at the end of it that the creators, specifically they're talking to Aaron Guzikowski, they asked him, will you just put together a highlight reel of all the times you kill father once the show's over? And it's like, I don't want that.
Yeah, please don't. Like, he's not Kenny.
He pretty much is Kenny. I mean, if he's going to adopt a fake name, mother adopted a fake name, I feel like his is going to have to be Kenny.
What was the name that mother adopted?
It was when the Mithraic soldiers showed up in the very end of
Oh,
episode
okay.
1, and she's, don't tell them I'm an android, and you're led to believe that the Mithraics are going to have, oh, they don't like androids, but then you find out that they've got a bunch of them and that necromancers are theirs, and so it's like, well, why did she not want them to know that she was an android? Like, I
I
don't.
think she could. I think she was trying to fake them that they were just people that lived there and that they should just go away. Like, oh, we're just people. We live here. Go away.
Yeah, I
So,
thought it was going to be tied into the atheists, though. It was going to be something like, "Oh, only atheists have soulless robots." But
hey,
nope.
at the very end of the show, the very last scene, we see Marcus fumbling through the woods, and then he stumbles onto a base camp for people in black clothes with combat gear, and then the camera pans up to show us some big spaceship hovering there above the forest. Do you think that's the atheists coming from Earth? Is that like another ship? Or do you think that that's something else?
Confirmed to be atheist army.
Oh, okay, okay. So the atheists also sent. So why the heck did those other two impersonate? I guess you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket.
So my theory on that is this is a radical cell of atheists. And so it was one of those deep, dark secrets that not everybody was privy to. And so that proves that Caleb and Mary were low ranking nothings. And so they were like the peasant class of atheists that wanted to survive.
Gotcha. So that was their
Because
solution.
but then we also have this awkward conversation with Campion Surgeon, the hacker corruption guy, that declared, I'm pretty sure it was him that declared, that the atheists didn't have the technology to build an ark. And when you look at the ships, they're very different. At
Yeah.
first, I thought that it
Okay.
was the atheists got a hold of an ark and killed everybody and took it over, pirate style. But they are very different, and I can't imagine that the Mithraic people would like non uniform ships.
Overall, with Raised by Wolves, I really enjoyed it. I was definitely entertained the whole show, even with the more fillery episodes where nothing of real consequence transpired. I was always glued to the TV and interested in the survival of all the characters. I really enjoyed the carousel of characters taking turns being antagonist and protagonist. I found that to be super fresh. Overall, I really, really enjoyed the show and I would recommend checking it out.
And it was fantastic with how much real world detail they've incorporated. I also just loved that it's called Raised by Wolves. Once you've finished the whole show, you can sit back and wonder about it. It just makes sense. These kids were raised by Mother. Look at Mother.
Yeah, it's
analyzer.
perfect. It's
It's
perfect.
perfect. It really is. And when you have things like the she wolf being referenced, it's just even better. So overall, this was a very enjoyable show. And thank you, Chris, for encouraging me to watch it. I probably never would have if it wasn't for this podcast. And thank you to all of you listeners that stuck around through this conversation. This was a blast talking about it. It was the first time that Chris and I actually talked about this show together because he wanted to avoid spoiling anything for me because he knows how much I hate spoilers. We hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we hope you will enjoy the show if for some reason you listened to this without watching the show. Anyways, I really look forward to our next episode. We'll catch you next time.
Next time, we're going to be talking about The Martian. Very excited to be talking about it. It's one of my favorite movies. We're just feeling the Ridley Scott vibes, and so we're going to continue on to The Martian.
Remember, you can follow Bored and Nerdy on Instagram and YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Let us know what you want to hear about. We definitely ran into that issue for this episode where we sat back and wondered, hey, what should we talk about next? And you know, it would be really convenient if you guys just sent us an email. Then we wouldn't have to make up our mind on things. That would be really cool.
Yeah, or you could put in a comment, email, comment. We are boredandnerdy@gmail.com. You can comment on us on YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. We hope you're a little less bored and a little more nerdy.